All right, so the topic of this webinar is advanced jerkbait fishing. That's something that I love doing. It's a technique that I pretty much always catch my first bass of the year on a jerkbait, just because it works so good this time of year. Works great pre-spawn. Really, it works year round, but especially in the springtime, it's a great technique. And just to kind of give you a little idea of what we're going to cover today, quick bio of myself. My name's Tyler Brink. So thank you all for attending. This is my third webinar of the year. It's sponsored by Navionics and Seagar, but we're going to be talking about all different types of brands and all different types of products. Like I said earlier, it will be recorded and on YouTube afterwards. My YouTube is, you can just search for Tyler Brinks. It's Tyler Brinks Fishing, but you can subscribe there. I have all my past webinars on there as well. Feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll stop periodically just to take a look to see if there's any questions. And if they're related to what we're talking about, we'll get into them right then. And then if not, we'll answer them all at the end. So feel free to ask any questions you have at any time. We're also doing a drawing for 2 spools of Seagar Invisex, the 10-pound. This is what I use. So just for attending today, you're in the drawing. And I will have this on my YouTube page right after this, or on my Facebook page, I should say. And it's, I'll put it on the Tyler Brinks page, not my personal account, but I'll have the results of who won it, and there's gonna be 2 of these given out. So we're gonna kind of cover a lot of things today. We're gonna talk about jerkbait gear, make sure that, there's a lot of preference that goes into that. I'll show you what I use and why. There's a lot of things that can account for, the size of jerkbait rod, for instance, could be, if you're taller or shorter, you might need a different one. We'll talk about line, jerkbait colors. If you've watched my other webinars, I really don't take a lot of, I don't put a lot of stock into colors generally, like when it comes to soft plastics or jigs or, a lot of techniques, but jerkbaits especially, I think color is very important. And we'll talk about that, talk about different retrieves. We're going to cover everything from the Finesse to the Magnum jerkbaits, everything from a 78 size bait all the way up to a 130 size bait. And, that's a huge difference, and there's a time and place for all of them. We're also going to talk about what to look for to actually use these jerkbaits. I'm going to pause here and just see if you have any questions. Like I said, just go ahead and shoot them off at any time. Okay. Okay, so jerkbait line. Like I said, this is what we're gonna give out is 2 spools of this. We're gonna give out a spool to each person that wins the drawing. And I use Seagar Invisex. It's really limp, it's really manageable, it casts well, and as far as fluorocarbon goes, it's the best. And it's what I use is Seagar, so hopefully you can win and you can try it out yourself. But 10-pound is typically what I use for jerkbaits. I will go to a bigger size for bigger baits, and I will downsize to 8 or even 6 with some of the lighter jerkbaits that I use on spinning gear. And we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So like I said, with jerkbait gear, a lot of this is going to depend on basically how tall you are, your preferences, how big your hands are. You just want to find something that's comfortable for you. So typically when I'm using a jerkbait, I'm going to be jerking it downward. So I like a rod that's not going to smack the tip, the tip into the water. So a 6'6" or a 6'8" is about perfect for me. 5'11", so that's what I like. Some people use a jerkbait with a more sweeping action so they can get away with a longer rod. So really it's just going to come down to preference. But for me, this one right here, the Phoenix Recon, the 6'8" medium is perfect. I have some different 6'8" or 6'6" rods, even 7-foot rods that I'll use, but I found that 6'8" is about perfect. This is also a little bit smaller reel because when I'm using a jerkbait, I like to palm the reel as I'm working the bait. So this is a Shimano Corrado 70. It is a smaller size reel. So like I said, typically when you're using a jerkbait, it's going to be a shorter rod, just so you can have that downward ripping action without smacking into the water, without actually digging into the water. 6'8" works for me, but a lot of people like 7-foot. It's just going to be finding a preference and depending on the action and how you're actually using a jerkbait. Again, medium is my choice. Like I was talking about with the reels, smaller reel is nice. I like about an average 6.4 or 7.1 to 1 reel. I don't like any of the slow retrieves. Those are great for crankbaits, but as you're jerking the bait, you're going to need to pick up a lot of slack. So those slower retrieves are not the best, in my opinion. And also having a good casting ability. A lot of these jerkbaits are really light, so something that's going to cast really well. That 10-pound line does help get your distance, but getting a long cast is really important, especially when you're getting into those deeper diving and suspended baits where you want them to get down quicker, so that you know, being able to cast a long ways makes a huge difference in getting it down as deep as possible. So like I said, that Corrado 70 is my choice now. It's an awesome reel. So as far as when and where, you know, there's really no wrong place to throw jerkbait. You know, like I said at the beginning, it seems like every year that's the first fish that I catch, you know, after the ice is gone, is on a jerkbait. It just works that time of year when nothing else will. You know, when the water's in the 30s, you know, the high 30s into the low 50s, it's really prime. You know, but I found with smallmouth and spotted bass and sometimes largemouth, you know, they will eat them all year long. You know, you can always get on a good jerkbait bite with smallmouth in the middle of summer. You know, and really, as a general rule of thumb, the lower the temp, the longer the pause. All right, so we're going to pause here for just a second, speaking of pauses, and see if we have any questions. And if not, we're going to get back into it. Okay. Okay, it looks like I got one question, and for some reason I cannot see it. Okay, so we'll get to that definitely. It's for some reason it's not pulling up, but we'll get back to that. But again, if you have any questions, we'll make sure they're all answered. Okay. Okay, so like I mentioned also earlier, you know, color selection is huge with jerkbaits, and I say this all the time, but when it comes to soft plastics or jigs, I'm so basic with colors. I honestly don't think it matters. Honestly, I'm even colorblind, you know. But with jerkbaits, it does make a difference, and the reason is just because it's such a highly visual technique, you know. And the clear water is something that's really important for jerkbait for the most part, because fish travel a long ways to strike jerkbaits. So having the right color, something that's going to get their attention, is important. And I use everything from natural to bright, and I'll kind of tell you a general rule of thumb, you know, things that I've learned along the way. And this is typically when it's sunny or clear, or sunny and clear, translucent colors are the best. You know, so like your pro blues or any of those, you know, ghost minnow or any colors like that that are translucent. Those work great when it's sunny days and clear water. Now, when there's overcast days, typically solid colors, you know, those bright chartreuse, even those matte finishes, or those with flash, you know, either like a brown flash or gold flash or chrome blue, you know, those are great for overcast conditions just because it helps fish find those jerkbaits. Now, when it's windy, you know, you can really get away with a lot of different colors, which is awesome because, you know, wind breaks up everything underwater. So, but typically if it's really windy and really stirred up, something with some reflective properties. So any of those flash colors or, you know, chrome and things like that is what I'm going to go with. But there's no there's no set rules on this. You know, a lot of people always stick with the same colors. You know, that's why, you know, like a sexy shad color or a pearl or something like that, people use all the time and catch fish on them all the time. So they're just because this is what I use, you know, there's a lot of variation on what will work and what will get a fish's attention. But I found that this to be the most accurate, you know, kind of rules of thumb for picking colors. So we're going to talk about finesse jerkbaits first. And, you know, this is something that I really like doing. You can see this jerkbait's been, you know, caught a few fish. And this is a Pointer 78. And this is a BioVex Stay 80. So these are small, you know, 3-inch long baits basically, you know, but they work really, really well and they do catch big fish. You can see there's one. And actually the reason I put this picture in here is because this is like something that most people wouldn't be throwing a jerkbait in, because this water's pretty muddy. It just did not seem like a jerkbait day, but the fish were really eating it. And I was using that bright chartreuse color just because of that water clarity. And the fish were eating it. So that's why I put that picture in there. There's no, you know, typically you want it to be clear, but not this day. So with those finesse jerkbaits is what I call them, you know, you're going to get that tighter darting action. You know, they're really good for really cold conditions and then also warmer weather as well. I mean, they're pretty versatile. You know, they're excellent for smallmouth just because smallmouth, you know, they have smaller mouths. I mean, they key on smaller bait fish a lot of times. but that doesn't mean it has to be smallmouth. I've just found that those smaller baits work great for smallmouth. And when I'm fishing these baits, I typically have a lot faster twitch of the rod instead of, you know, your jerk pause. You know, I'm twitching it a lot more, getting a lot more darting action out of those baits just because of the way that those are designed with that darting action. You know, some good examples of these types of baits, the ones that I really like, you know, something like a Pointer 78, like I talked about, the Megabass Trick Darter. You know, that's a great bait from Megabass. You know, everyone always talks about the Megabass Vision 110, but that Trick Darter is an awesome bait. It works really good for smallmouth. And like I said, it has that tight darting action. Same with that BioVex Stay 80. You know, it's a kind of the same class of baits, and it works great. You know, just to have that tight darting action that I was talking about. Okay. So next, we're going to go all the way up to the other end, and that's the Magnum jerkbaits. And, you know, as you can see, these jerkbaits are a lot bigger. These are, you know, like your 5-inch baits. That's a Pointer 128 size, and the depths ballast long minnow, the 130 size. You know, typically when I'm using these bigger jerkbaits, I'm basically imitating what you would imitate for a swim bait. You know, you can see these are like trout pattern baits. You know, they work really great, and they have a nice wide rolling action. So you're imitating a lot bigger bait fish, and you know, I typically match colors for that. But these are great baits here. So like I was saying, you're gonna get that wider action. So I have found that they're better for warmer water and then places where there's big fish, either if you're just trying to catch 1 or 2 big ones, or it's a lake known for bigger fish. You know, these bigger jerk baits are a great option for you. You know, you're going to fish them on heavier gear. You know, you're not going to be using 10-pound tests. You know, typically I'm going to be using 12 or even 15-pound tests for these bigger baits. And I fish them a lot faster, you know, ripping the baits to get a lot more flash, especially those 2 baits that I showed you that are really, have that really shiny finish on them. You know, the more you can rip them, the better flash you're going to get out of those. So like I said, that Megabass Edo Shiner, the Depths Ballast Long Minnow, or the Pointer 128 are great big jerk baits, and they work really well for catching big fish. So you're fishing it, you know, a lot different than you would with a smaller jerk bait. You're gonna, like I said, you're gonna be ripping it a lot faster, and you know, you're gonna be moving it a lot quicker as well. You're gonna be making a lot more casts. You know, it's really a workout fishing this when you're covering water, but you can catch some really big ones on these big jerk baits. And like I said, it's almost like a swim bait because you're imitating trout and kokanee salmon and things like that. So now we're going to kind of go in the middle, and this is what I would call like your standard jerk baits, you know, stuff that everyone always talks about, you know, the Megabass Vision 110, or this is I'm a Flit 120. These are probably my 2 favorite jerk baits, period. You know, they are great all around jerk baits. You know, you really can't beat a Megabass Vision 110 in a lot of situations. You know, they're really expensive, you know, like $25, but they work, you know, and as far as what I do, you know, I kind of gave you a quick bio earlier, but I'm an outdoor writer, so I interview a lot of pro anglers, and you know, we do articles on jerk baits and things like that. And no matter who they're sponsored by, they all use Megabass. You know, they may not, you know, say that in the article. They may just say a jerk bait, but you know, talking to them, every single one of them is using that Megabass Vision 110. It is that good of a bait. But on the other hand, that I'm a Flit 120, and there's also a smaller size, 100. You know, I really like those baits as well. You know, they have a kind of a more erratic retrieve, you know, and there's a time when they will outperform that Vision 110, definitely. So those are 2 baits. Honestly, if I could pick 2 jerk baits to have all for the rest of my life, it'd be these 2 right here. They work really well in a number of situations. So you know, it's kind of like the best all-around size. You know, that 100, the 120, the 110. You know, that, you know, your 4.5-inch bait. I mean, those work great for all different types of fish, all different species of fish, all different water temperatures. I mean, they're just, like I said, they're very versatile. So if you're kind of new to jerk baits, and I would recommend getting those 2. You know, like I said, those Megabass Vision 110s are pretty expensive. You know, they do have a lot of copycats out there. You know, there's a Lucky Strike version that's a lot cheaper. There's a lot of them that have copied that same size. You know, you will get the same effect. You know, you're not going to have as good of a suspending action. You're not going to have, obviously, like the best colors and the best hooks. But if, you know, if you're on a budget and you only got $8 or $10, you know, that might be something to try out as well to kind of get into it. And those I'm a Flits, you know, they're about $9-10 as well. So they're not too expensive either. Same with that Rapala Shadow Wrap. And that's another one that I've started using more in the last couple of years. Well, I mean, it's only a couple years old, but I've actually gained a lot of confidence in that. It has a flat side on it, and it has a nice darting action, and it has a really good reflection as well. It has a lot of flash, so it's a really good bait just because of how it's designed. So with these, these standard jerk baits, it's that best all-around size. I typically use a lot of slow pauses, because they're so good at suspending. You want to let them suspend, twitch, pause. And I think I mentioned this already earlier, but as a standard rule of thumb, the colder the water, the longer you're going to let them pause. And you will be surprised how many times you'll pause it and it's just sitting there and a fish will come up and grab it. It's amazing. They are just watching it and they'll hit it when it's just sitting there, or they'll hit it as soon as you make one twitch. That's kind of my experience with it. All right, so we're going to take a little break here and see if we have any questions, and we'll go ahead and get back into the deep jerk baits in a little bit. Lots of questions here. I see the questions, but okay, what is Quentin saying? Quentin raised his hand, it said, so let's see what. For some reason, it's not letting me get to my questions, so stop the share. Okay, cool. Good. Got to the question. So we'll go ahead and, like I said, take a little break. So first question, Jerry says, is reason for not using braid and leader. I have seen some people that do this, and the benefits to that would be you'd have a lot more casting distance, especially if you're using these lighter jerk baits. But I typically stay away from braid anytime I'm using treble hooks at all, just because there's no stretch. So you're going to tend to rip treble hooks out more. I know some people really like it. Top water I do a little bit with a mono leader to kind of give it a shock absorber. So I guess you could. I just haven't done that. Okay. Do I use feathered trailers? This is a good question, Sebastian. If so, when and where do you use them? I really don't add them, but there are some baits that I like that have them already. Something like a Rapala X-Wrap or some of the Yozuri baits. So I don't think it harms it. I would say that if they're really keyed on shad, I think that it might be an added attention as well. An added attractant, I should say. Okay. Oh, Andy, good question. Is in a yellow perch-based lake, and I didn't mention this to you guys, but I live in Spokane, Washington, and that's what we have in all of our lakes. And it's clear water, just like you're mentioning there. Definitely use a perch color. Either that mega bass perch color that I showed the picture of, or something like a gold flash or a brown flash or something like that. That's going to look like a perch. Definitely. Good question, though, Andy. Okay. Jerry says, my water in Virginia is not that clear, so is bigger and brighter better? Yeah, I would say definitely. If there's some clarity and it's just stained, you might be able to get away with a smaller bait, but typically you're going to want that bigger, brighter bait. I mean, just the same thing as if you're using a chartreuse square bill. I mean, don't be afraid to throw something with a lot of chartreuse on a jerk bait as well. Okay, another good question from Jake. So is there a general rule of thumb for temperature and seconds of pause? I really don't have like a set measurement. It's more just letting the fish tell you what they're biting, what they're going to hit. So if you're not getting bites, just let the pause last longer. But I don't have a set count. Sometimes I'll let it sit 5-10 seconds or more, just depending on what the fish are doing. So good question. Okay. Okay, another good question. Yeah, and keep these questions coming, guys. I appreciate this. These are good ones. But I move to a different style of bait if the water is 1 foot of visibility or less. I probably would. I mean, it just depends on the situation. I mean, typically, yeah, I would probably go with a crankbait, but I wouldn't say that it's definitely not going to work. Anthony asked, what were the colors on the Ima Flit and the 110? So the Ima Flit that I showed you was the brown flash, which is my favorite color. It was discontinued, but now it's back. So definitely check that out. If you fish anything with perch, it's a great color. And the 110, I don't know exactly what it's called. It's just, I think it's called just perch. I mean, it's just a yellow perch color, northern perch. It's one of those. Tom, good question. Any problem with using mono since the drop rate is slower? You know, I've always used fluorocarbon for this just because they're, like you said, it doesn't, you know, it sinks, so you're going to get your bait down deeper. But like I was saying, I write articles, and there's an article I just did recently with someone talking about using mono specifically for shallow jerkbait fishing. And the reason is to keep it from diving too deep, and also the less drag in the water, they can work the bait around. If you know, if they're getting too close to a dock post or a brush pile, it's easier to kind of redirect the bait. So in those situations, it makes sense to use a mono, but typically fluorocarbon is the way to go when you're fishing more offshore stuff and you want to get your bait deeper. Another couple questions and we'll get on to presentation, but Brad says, do you use scent spray or strips? You know, I really don't for any reaction baits, just because, you know, typically they're going to see the bait and attack it so quickly that I don't know if it makes a difference, but I've heard of people doing it. So I wouldn't completely write it off. It's just not something that I've done. Okay. All right, one more quick question, and we'll talk about this, Quentin. The question was, do you change the hook? So we'll definitely get into that. So that's good. We're going to talk about some modifications here in a minute. But good questions. Nice little break, guys. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about deep jerk baits. And when I mean deep jerk baits, I'm talking about stuff that can get down to about 10 feet or so. So this is that same Megabass color that I showed you earlier. This is just the Megabass Vision 110+1. So this will get down that deep. This is it's a Strike King bait. I believe it's called the 300D. It's a fairly new bait, and I actually haven't used this, but I was just showing you an example of something with a lot deeper bill that will get down to those deeper fish. So typically, talking about deep jerk baits, it's going to be colder months when the fish haven't quite moved up. You know, you're going to use a lot of slow pauses. You know, slower pauses. You're going to let them suspend. You know, you're going to, at the initial cast, you're going to be ripping them really quickly to get them down. You know, so I should say them there, but you want to get them down. You know, so a bait like a Lucky Craft Stacy, a Megabass Vision 110+1. Rapala Shadow Wrap Deep. There's a lot of deep crankbaits. And, you know, one story that I have about this was fishing Lake Erie a few years ago. And it was early spring, you know, early May, and it was really cold, but the water is really clear there just because, you know, they have the zebra mussels. So it's very clear. So you can see fish down there 20 feet swimming around. But we're fishing these deep jerk baits, and the smallmouth were coming up to it and groups following these deep jerk baits. And one thing that I always remember is just how the fish were acting. You know, they were, all of them gathered around the fish, just waiting for them to pause, or watching the fish, the jerk bait as it was paused. And one of the fish would just go up and bite the bait. It was the strangest thing seeing it up close, but they would hit it when it's just sitting there, and all the fish were kind of gathered around, and then one of them would get brave enough to go up and just suck the bait in like they're eating a worm. So, you know, I've kind of always thought about that as I'm fishing these jerk baits, just because I was able to visually see that. And it was crazy seeing how they would hit it. And even when they wouldn't even hit it that hard. It was really strange. But I kind of always picture that when I'm pausing any jerk baits, you know, just picturing that there's a fish sitting there, you know, either waiting for you to make one more twitch or just letting it sit, because a lot of times they will hit it when it's just sitting there. So that was just a strange situation. And I think that's what they do a lot of times. You know, they'll come up to it, they'll see it move, they'll go up and check it out and either hit it or take off, you know. So that's just something I always thought about. And it's, you know, that's what I do as I'm pausing the bait, is hoping there's a group of 3 or 4 pound smallmouth watching it like there was that day. Okay, so we're going to move on to something that's part jerkbait, part crankbait, but, you know, more the shad profile baits. You know, some of these, like your shad wrap, you know, you're going to fish that more like a crankbait. You're going to cast it out and reel. Really, all these baits pictured here, you know, you could do that, but a lot of them you can fish like a jerkbait. You know, something like this Megabass Margay, this Yozuri 3DB. You know, you can actually fish a shad wrap or anything else like a jerkbait with just intermixing twitches with retrieving it. So it's kind of jerkbait fishing, but it's kind of not. But, you know, it's definitely something not to overlook. So, the shad profile baits, everyone always talks about a shad wrap, colder months, it has that tight wobble, casting them out. Like I said, they're kind of part crankbait, part jerkbait. Because they're so light, you're going to want to use spinning tackle. Some of the ones that are made out of balsa, you basically have to, just because they're that thin, or that light, I should say. But some of the plastic ones, they may weigh 3/8 of an ounce. So you could probably get away with, that jerkbait rod that I mentioned earlier. Another one is that I'm a Foxy Fry, the dual hardcore shad. I mean, there's just tons of baits like this that kind of can bridge the gap between crankbait and jerkbait. And, kind of as a rule of thumb, jerkbait is always good early in the year. And then as it gets warmer, you can start mixing in crankbaits when the water hits about, I'd say, the high 40s and 50s. You can get away with crankbaits. And there's a point where a crankbait will start to outperform a jerkbait, just because it's just how it happens all the time, at least from my experience. But these are great baits that can kind of bridge that gap and kind of catch fish in both different temperature ranges. Okay, so good. I know we had that question earlier about changing out hooks. So we're going to kind of talk about some different modifications that I make. As far as weighting and balancing jerk baits. You can use wire or suspend dots, or those strips that Storm makes. They really help make baits suspend. And you could also get fish to, you can also get them to deeper depths as well. Now, like I said, we had that question about changing out hooks. You can replace them. I do, but you really have to be careful. You want to make sure that you're matching them with the same gauge wire of the other hooks. You don't want to put a really thick hook in there, or a really bigger hook, because it can really affect the bait. So typically try to get the exact same ones, or the same size, or the same gauge, unless you're trying to add maybe one heavier hook in the front. That will change the action of it, or you want to put one in the back. It may have it sink a little bit different. You can do that, but just be careful when you're replacing hooks. But it's always a good idea to replace hooks, just because any reaction bait technique, your hooks are going to get dull if you're catching fish. You always talk about the pros, they change out hooks all the time, and a lot of them do. I mean, they change out several times in the same day, just because they don't want to lose any fish. So definitely it is good to replace them, but just be careful with what you replace them with. So I'll show you a couple little tricks that I do. So these are those Storm suspend strips, and it's just like it sounds. It's just a strip of lead, and they also have the little dots, and you could put those under the belly of the bait. You can put them in the tail of the bait. It's going to just make your bait suspend a little bit different, and also get to deeper depths as well. They're pretty inexpensive too. You can just buy a strip of them, and just, you don't have to add them all the time. They stay on there pretty well. One other thing you can do is add some wire. And I did do a video on this, and it's really simple. This is just some craft wire. I don't know exactly what it's made of, but I'm imagining some kind of lead, with some kind of silver stuff attached to it. But you can just wrap that around the shank. Really, anything with some weight will help your bait suspend. Again, if you want it to suspend even, put it in the middle treble hook, or if it's only two, you'll have to pick either the front or the back. But just know that it's going to suspend differently because of that wire added. But it's a cheap and easy way to do it. Storage, jerkbaits, they get tangled up all the time. So this is something new for me. This is the Bass Mafia double barrel storage. It's really cool. And I'll put a link to this and a lot of the products I talked about in the video. If you're watching the recorded version, I'll have the links to where you can get these products. But I found that this to be a lot easier way to store your baits. They're not going to get tangled up, and you can easily just pull a bait out with 2 fingers, or just put your finger down and slide it out. Pretty cool concept, just to make sure that your baits don't get all tangled up. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about locations here. Then we'll take another pause in a second to see if there's any more questions. But generally, the biggest thing that I always look for throwing a jerkbait is flats. Either a flat, big, huge flat that leads to a deeper area, or flats that taper off to a point, or any of those situations. But generally, anything flat is where the fish are going to be, just because that's where they're coming to feed. And a bait like a jerkbait is perfect when you're covering water, looking for those feeding fish. So either rock areas on flats, those transitions from where the flat drops off into deeper water, or near grass. You know, I say near like that because jerk baits and grass are really don't go together very well. You know, but you still want to be around the grass because a lot of times fish are going to be near those grassy areas. So, you know, your deep weed lines, you know, your outside weed edges, things like that, you can throw a jerk bait there and you're not going to be messing with getting grass off of them all the time. And it's funny because, you know, something like a rattle trap, you know, which is pretty similar, you know, I like to find grass and I like to rip it through grass, but for some reason it just doesn't work the same with a jerk bait, at least in my opinion. So we're going to do like I said, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to see if there's any more questions, but we're also going to show you the Navionics web app for map study. I show this in pretty much all of my webinars. It's free. It's an easy way to check out lakes, look for those flat areas, and I'll show you a few tricks on using that. But if you have any questions, okay, we do have a few more questions. So like I said, we'll go ahead and stop here for a second. So, do you find more success in the morning or at night with jerk baits? Tom says, and you know, I would say, yeah. I mean, for the most part, I mean, anytime you're using a reaction bait, you're going to have those windows in the morning or right before it gets dark where they're going to be a lot more apt to bite a reaction bait. So, you know, there are those windows where it will definitely work, but it doesn't mean that they wouldn't work all the time. Okay, another good question. What color for tannic water? And I would say tannic's kind of difficult to say. I mean, I know I lived in Florida for a while, so there was a lot of, you know, that tannic, you know, tea-looking water, and a good color is chartreuse, definitely, in that kind of water. Anything that's off color like that, chartreuse or white are two good colors for that type of water clarity. Okay. Oh, good question, Kent. Do you use jerk baits during the shad spawn as a first choice over other lures? And where I live now, we actually have no shad, so it's kind of tricky. But I have lived in places with shad, and you know that shad spawn is a huge deal. And a jerk bait is an excellent choice if the bass or the shad are spawning and the bass are keen on them. You know, same with the swim bait or, you know, crankbait. You know, those are good choices as well. But I'd say that's definitely a good choice. You know, another one that I like is a soft jerk bait, you know, like a fluke or something like that. You know, those are great options as well, but can't go wrong with a jerk bait if there's shad around. Okay, another good question, and it's this relates to kind of those hybrid jerk bait crankbaits like I was talking about. And Jake wants to know if I have any experience with the Megabass flap sap. I've never owned one, but I know that they work really well. You know, and I don't know. I've actually never used those. I know that Edwin Evers caught a lot of fish in the last Bassmaster Classic on that, and I'd have to take a look at it. I've seen it, but I don't know how to work it honestly. But it is a popular bait. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and move on into the Navionics portion of it. We're gonna talk about using the web app. Like I said, it's free, so cool thing. Just go to navionics.com. Then just go ahead and come over here to web app. It'll load up. It'll show you where you're at. So we're gonna go ahead and go over here, just because I know where we're at. So okay, so you just zoom in on your lake. Okay, so right away you're gonna see the different colors, and that's going to show you the different flat areas. So also always make sure that you hit this button over here, this sonar chart button. That's going to give you the 1 foot contour intervals. And again, this is a free tool you can use, kind of like a try it before you buy it. If you're thinking of getting a Navionics card, this will show you what you'll see if you get it. So the way it's set up, you know, this is a huge flat, but it just is slowly dropping off. But you can see as it comes out to the river channel, it's blue. So let's see, you know, this is a good flat area right here, just because it's that blue that we talked about. And it is a lot slower drop. So this would be a great place for a jerkbait. I actually know that it is personally, so I'm kind of cheating there because I've fished there before. Same thing over here. You can see as it comes out to the river channel, this is a very flat area because those lines are a lot thicker. but they really stand out well on the Navionics card just because of the different color shadings. And you can really see the river channel pretty well. There's another good flat right there. All these would be awesome places for jerk baits. And you could really find this on just about any lake. You know, this lake is river based, so there's a lot of flats and a lot of bends, but we can go somewhere that is not quite as obvious. Okay, here we go, Banks Lake. This is also, you know, river, but you can see as you're zooming in, you could see that those blue lines. You know, these are awesome places for jerk baits just because those lines, it's just a slowly tapering area, so it's flat. Really, anytime you see that blue, you know, this is great too because you can see how far out it comes, and how slow it gets deeper, how slowly it gets deeper. So yeah, that's just the Navionics web app. Again, it's free. You can also do this if you have the mobile app or if you have a Navionics card in your fish finder on your boat. Okay, so cool. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to shoot them off now. Okay, and, okay, we'll get back to the presentation, and we're almost done with that, but we'll jump back to the questions as well. Okay, we kind of already talked about this, but it's free, easy to use. You know, it's awesome to research places that you haven't been or places that you fish all the time. It's cool. I'm always on that. So like I said, we will get back to the questions, but if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. You can send it to tbrinks@navionics.com. You know, these are my social media accounts. You know, feel free to follow me, ask me questions, do whatever you want to do. And I appreciate you guys all coming here to this webinar. Like I said, this is the final one of the year. We also did one on drop shot fishing or finesse fishing, and that one's up on my YouTube page already. And then there's a lot from last year, and then I also did one this year on swim baits for smallmouth. But feel free to check those out. Recorded versions, you can watch them at your leisure. Okay, so if we have any questions, now's the time. Okay, so I'm gonna wait here and see if you guys have any. See. Okay. All right, so some more good questions. Jerry says, would you work jerk baits over brush piles in 15 feet of water? I would say yes, definitely. You know, especially if you have fish that are suspended, you could see them on your graph. You know, a lot of times they're suspended at the tops of those brush piles. I would say jerk bait is an excellent choice for that, and especially if there's any spotted bass. You know, they suspend all around jerk bait or around brush piles and are very willing to chase a jerk bait even if it's 5 or 10 feet above them. So Rich says, what's the deepest you could use a jerk bait? You know, you could get a jerk bait down easily to 10 or more feet. You know, that's probably about as deep as I would go. You know, that's not to say I wouldn't fish it over 20 or 30 feet of water. You know, I could think back of a time fishing Lake Shasta in California, and it had to be 40 feet. It was in front of this dam. It might have been even deeper, but fishing a jerk bait that went down about 10 feet, that Lucky Craft Stacy was the ticket that time. I mean, they were suspended and they were willing to chase jerk baits. Another good question: favorite line size? You know, like I said earlier, I like 10-pound a lot. You know, it's kind of good all around where you're going to get that thinner diameter to get the bait down deeper, and it's still strong enough if you happen to catch it. You know, a really big one, you're not going to be too stressed about it. You know, another thing too is, you know, I use that Seaguar Invisex, and if you check out the diameters of that, it's a lot thinner than other brands. So, you know, you're going to get that jerkbait down deeper, but you're not sacrificing the depth or the strength, I should say. So definitely check that out. No matter what line you're using, check out the diameter because it plays a huge role in getting baits down, whether it's your jerkbait, your crankbait, you know, really any bait that is a moving bait, you can get it down a lot deeper with that thinner line. Okay, another good question from Jake. Can you fish a jerkbait in fast current on a deep river? You know, you could. It's just you're gonna have to work it a lot faster just to keep up with it. So you're gonna be casting way up river, up the stream, and working a lot faster. But yeah, you definitely could. You know, I probably wouldn't go with a really deep diving crankbait because it's just gonna be a lot of work really. But you know, something like a that Vision 110 or something that dives like 4 or 5 feet. And if you're working it really quickly and paying attention to the current, you can definitely get away with it. And if you're talking smallmouth, I mean, they would definitely bite it. So yeah, good question. And I do that sometimes too. Is early spring, a lot of lakes that I fish, there's a lot of current, a lot of runoff, snow melt, and jerkbait is a good choice. Oh yeah, another good question. Can you talk about when you get a bite? I mean, it's a lot of times you're watching your line, even in that fast current that we're talking about, and your line's gonna jump. It's almost like like you're using a plastic worm and you see a fish swimming away with it. It's kind of the same thing where the bait. Or you're just going to watch your line. It's crazy that they hit it that hard, but usually there's a lot of slack in your line. So you'll just watch your line and it will take off. Just like they picked up a plastic worm and are swimming with it. The only difference is you just have to basically lift and you're going to hook them. You don't have to really ram a hook set into them. Yeah, another good question, kind of about current and things like that, and drifting. With those long pauses, there's a lot of slack out there. So do I retrieve it or let that slack set? And I do retrieve it a little bit, but you still want to have a bow in your line. Just so you know that you're not unintentionally moving the bait, if that makes sense. So that's a good question. Typically with rods, it's going to be a medium power, medium action. Something that has some flex to it. That may be a little bit too light for something like a crankbait, but I'd say medium is your best all around. Yeah, kind of backing up to when you get a bite. This is an add-on to that question is it tough to detect bites in windy conditions? I mean, it is harder, but a lot of times those fish will hook themselves, or you'll jerk it, and it's pause, and they'll grab it and run the other way, and they'll know because your rod will be bending. So it's not as hard as it sounds, and if you're just paying attention, reeling up a little bit of slack and twitching to compensate for the wind, or like we were talking about with the drift earlier. Yeah, that's a good question. This next one is if I have a preference on bait casting or spinning gear. A lot of people love throwing a jerk bait on a spinning equipment. I really don't like it as much. I really don't like using spinning gear for anything it's fast moving. It's just I feel like I don't have as much control. But typically, I'm gonna just use a lighter bait cast rod, like I was talking about, that medium action, downsized reel size, lighter line, things like that. I would much prefer to use it on bait casting equipment just because I feel I have more control of working the bait and also reeling in a fish as well. But I see people using jerk baits for or spinning gear for jerk baits all the time, and they love it. So if that's your preference, yeah, you could definitely get away with doing that. Yeah, and I hear that a lot. It seems like it's kind of regional too. A lot of people in the Midwest, they use a spinning rod for jerk baits a lot more. That's just what I've heard and witnessed. But I definitely wouldn't fault you for using spinning gear for it. It just comes down to preference. Oh, another good question. Excuse me for a second. This has to do with the tip action. With the rod, you want to have some. You want to have a good tip because this bait is, or this technique, you are working the bait a lot with your rod. So you want to have a soft, I wouldn't say a softer tip, but you want to have a little bit of action on your tip. So you don't want a stiff rod. So that tip should have some give. So when you're working it, you have a little bit of flex there, and you get that more natural action. And then also for hooking fish, it makes it a big difference as well. Having a little bit of give in the tip. Yeah, there's a lot of good jerkbait rods out there. Some are specifically made for it. So if you have a favorite rod brand, I mean, the way fishing is now, it's so technique specific that there's definitely jerkbait rods on the market. Another rod that I didn't mention that I do own is a Denali jerkbait rod. It's perfect. I believe it's 6'6" or 6'8". It's really good for that, for those lighter jerkbaits. There's just a lot of specific rods built for it that have kind of the good action that gets the most out of your jerkbaits. But yeah, I like that Phoenix Recon. The one I have is a Recon 2. Now there's a Recon Elite. It's a great one. It's a 683, 6'8", 3 power. So it's 6'8" medium. It's a good rod for that. And they have some people use more like a composite rod, a lighter crankbait rod. You could do that as well. Something that's has that composite that's part glass, part graphite. You can definitely get away with that. Cool. And we did have a question earlier, and like I said, just for attending, you are in the drawing for this, and I will once I get the attendance report, I'll put it in the random generator, this website that you do. Hit enter, it'll spit out a name, and I'll do it again, it'll spit out another name, and I'll put that on my Facebook page. I'll do that tonight. But just search for Tyler Brinks, and it's not my personal page. It's like a fan page type thing. So I'm gonna put it on that page. Yeah, thanks, Jake. You did ask a lot of questions. You had very helpful. He said he should just win for asking the most questions. So sorry, I can't do it that way. But thanks for all your questions. All right, guys. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to end it here. But like I said, this will be up on YouTube, and we'll have it up on my YouTube, and also Navionics is going to put it up on their YouTube channel as well. So check it out if you want to go back through it, see any of my old webinars, subscribe to my page. And I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and have a great season. Use these jerkbait tips, catch some big fish. I can't wait. I'm actually going out fishing tomorrow. Haven't caught a bass all year. I'm going to have some jerkbait tied on. So we'll see if it happens again, where that's the first fish of the year is on a jerkbait. It seems like it happens all the time. So good luck, everyone, and thanks for attending.